In today's episode, I'm going to convince you why your company needs more meetings, not less, if you want to be more productive. If this is your first time listening, my name is Matt Gjertsen. I am a former Air Force instructor pilot, former head of training and development at SpaceX, and I am now the founder and CEO of Better Everyday Studios, a company that helps organizations improve by making better managers. I have to start with a story from several years ago when I first started working at SpaceX, and we were in an all hands, right, where they bring everybody together. Elon and Gwen come and tell everybody what's going on. And an engineering friend of mine kind of bumped me with his shoulder, showed me his phone, and he had this ticker going that was like counting up really quickly. And I was like, well, what's that? He said, well, what I did is I took the number of employees that we have approximately, assumed an average salary for all those employees. And this is a by second counter of how much it is costing us to hold this all hands, right? Just in people's salaries. Kind of, he was intending, showing that this was a waste of time, just a huge waste of money. And I got to admit that at the time I couldn't agree more with him, right? I was from the military. We would have these big wing all calls, group all calls, and they were always a huge waste of time. They'd be award ceremonies or telling stories, and it would just be what are we doing here? And folks, like, oh my gosh, we have stuff to do, we have things to do. And so that's what I had felt. And then a few years ago, I read a book by General Stanley McChrystal called Team of Teams. And it completely changed my mind. Why? And I do genuinely think that in a lot of organizations, not everyone, but in a lot of organizations and in a lot of teams, you could do much better if you actually had more meetings, not less. And this is in a time where everyone is trying to have fewer meetings. So let me start making this case by telling you the story of Team of Teams first. So General Stanley McChrystal, he was the general in charge of U.S. Special Forces Command in Iraq back in 2008. And so this is when Iraq was just a complete mess, right? Like everything was going wrong. Tons of people were dying. I think they were called Al Qaeda in Iraq, was really going after the US military, really pushing them back. Things were not going well. General McChrystal comes in, he takes charge, and he has this weird situation that he can't figure out, right? So he's in charge of special forces, but there's lots of different special forces groups. There's, the Navy SEALs, the Army Rangers. There's all these teams that individually, these teams are excellent. They are the absolute best in the world. But for some reason, you put them together into this situation and they were just falling all over one another. They were getting in each other's way, disrupting each other's operations, clearly not defeating the enemy as they saw it. Wasn't going well. And so he goes, what do we do? And one of the reasons that I love this book so much is because in some ways that description, removing it from the war context, applies to so many organizations that I've been with, especially scaling startups. In that you have all these people, take an engineering, like a space company, for example. You have the propulsion team, the structures team, the avionics team, the software team. Individually, they are all excellent. The challenge is getting them to work together. The challenge is getting them in sync, working together. And so for me, as I'm reading this book, I was working at SpaceX at the time, and I said, hey, this guy, this is our problem. Like this thing that he's dealing with, again, not a war situation, but this is the problem that we're trying to solve. So I'm just tearing through this book, trying to figure out what are they doing. And the whole point of what he tried to do with Special Forces Command, this transformation that he made, is to create what he called a shared consciousness, right? Where everybody in the organization understood everything that was happening. And there were several things that he did. Highly recommend you read the book. But one of the key things that he created was this thing called the O&I, the Operations and Intel Brief. And so imagine this. This is basically the equivalent of an all hands. It was the whole Special Forces Command that would show up for a 90-minute all hands every day. Imagine if you had a company all hands every single day. Boy, you'd probably be tearing your hair out. I probably would too. But I think it's the rationale behind it that is really interesting. And he actually gives rationale for that cadence as well that I think is really interesting. So the reason why they came up with a daily cadence for this meeting is because the book says that the cadence of a meeting like this, of a recurring meeting like this, should be based on the cadence of change in the situation, right? So they were in an incredibly dynamic situation, fighting in Iraq, so many operations happening simultaneously. They needed to meet every single day in order to match the pace of change for that situation. Why is this so important? Because if you think about it, regardless of whether it's every day, every week, every month, if things are changing in between the meetings, then the meetings are a waste of time, because all the decisions are being made between the meetings, right? You're having other smaller meetings or smaller get-togethers or Slack messages or email chains where all the important decisions that are being made. And so these meetings aren't happening fast enough to really be relevant. Alternatively, if you were having daily meetings but things weren't changing daily, then clearly the meetings are a waste of time because there's nothing to talk about. And so the key thing you have to think about is how often are things changing, and do our meetings match that pace of change, right? Do our meetings match the rate at which things are changing? And if they don't, then you should adjust that, because the key thing for something like an all hands, I think, any of these, and this could be, don't just think of this as a company all hands, this could be a team all hands as well. You need to ask yourself two basic questions. Is everybody we need in the meeting together? Right? This comes, this is a common thing from Scrum as well. Scrum stand-ups. One of the key things you have to have is all the decision makers, all the players need to be in the room together. That's what makes the meeting effective, because everyone's there. So the first question is everyone that you need in the meeting actually in the meeting? And then the second question is this happening at the right pace given the situation that we are in? So I would bet, unless it's just your team's meeting, chances are many of these larger meetings are happening at an incredibly slow cadence, like once a quarter, once every other quarter, that kind of thing, which is why they feel so useless, because nothing is actually happening there. Whereas if you actually had more potentially larger meetings that ensured everyone that needed to be in the meeting was in the meeting, and you could actually make decisions based on the situation at hand because you were keeping up that pace, I think these meetings could be incredibly effective. So I get it. Not everybody's going to start holding all hands, certainly not every day. I don't think most situations dictate that. But in this complex world that we have today, where we're talking about, pushing decisions down to people that are closer to the problem, the reason why that often doesn't work is because the people closest to the problem don't have all the context of the rest of the organization. And so by having these larger meetings more frequently, it's what allows everyone in the organization to have the context they need in order to make good decisions about all of the things that are facing them. So you can drive decision making down. You can actually have less meetings then, because everybody has the context they need to just make decisions instead of asking you via email, Slack, or some other meeting. And so if we have more of these larger meetings, I actually think it can potentially cut down on the smaller meetings that you're having and all of the other extraneous communication that's going on. So that's at least my take. That's how I view this. I highly recommend you read this book. This isn't the only thing. I don't think this would work in isolation. There's some other actions that they say you should take, but certainly the pressing problem of the world, of a lot of organizations today, is that they have all of these individuals or teams that are excellent in their own right. And the challenge is getting them to work together so that you can solve problems together. And I think one potential solution to that could be more larger meetings. I know that sounds crazy, but I really think it could work. I'd love to hear if you think so, whether you drop the comments below, whatever. I think this is a real impactful way that you could change your organization, and I'd love to hear if you think so too. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.